In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. O Lord our God, who has honored us with your own image, who has taught your elect so that most wise are they who give heed to your teaching, who reveals wisdom to babes, who has imparted wisdom. Open the hearts, the minds, and the lips of us, your servants, that we might receive the power of your law to the glory of your holy name, to the profit and upbuilding of your holy church, and that we understand your good and perfect will. Deliver us from every hostile oppression, preserve us in our own faith, and in all uprightness and purity all the days of our life, that we might advance in wisdom and in the fulfillment of your commandments, that being thus prepared we may glorify your most holy name and become heirs of your kingdom. For you are the God of mercy and gracious and strength, and to you do we send up glory, to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, both now and ever and to the ages of ages. Amen. Thank you. So before we start, I want to share a little bit just kind of how I think of this class and really think of, let's say, Orthodox education in general. There's idea that part of the education in the Orthodox Church is a very high theology, that we're here and it's a lot of book learning and, you have to memorize all this knowledge. But this isn't so much what education in the Orthodox Church is. We're going to provide, let's say, a theological framework for sure, but a true Orthodox education is really inculcated in the life of the church and established in participating in the services of the church and really experiencing the community in which we live. There's a famous quote by St. Gregory the theologian, and he says, to be a man who is a theologian is one who prays. So not what you know, but how much you pray and participate in the spiritual life. And then conversely, he says, not conversely, but in addition, he says, and one who prays is a theologian. So our goal really here is to develop this life of prayer. And also, again, to teach about that from the perspective of the Orthodox Church. And I want to read a little bit of a quote, and this quote is from Bishop Kallistos Ware. He's a recent theologian of the Orthodox Church, and he's very well known for his education and his introductory Orthodox books, which I'm gonna pass on to you as well. But in this, he says, "It is not the task of Christianity to provide easy answers to every question, but to make us progressively aware of a mystery. God is not so much the object of our knowledge as the cause of our wonder. A mystery is on the other contrary, something that is revealed for our understanding, but which we never understand exhaustively because it leads us into the depth or the darkness of God." So in this class, I really hope that you can take, of course, to learn about some of the details of the church, but also realize that we're delving into the depths of God. And that's our goal in the church, is that we continue to plumb the depths of God. And God is an infinite person that we encounter every day in the liturgy, that we encounter in other people. And it's our goal in the church to continue that encountering. So with that, I just want to kind of give a brief overview of this class, what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. I think everyone, I hope you received the schedule that I received via email. If I didn't or I don't have your email, please just talk to me and we'll write it down. If you just want to send me an email, my email is in the bulletin. It's also dnnick@stspiridon.church. Okay, so just briefly the class schedule that we're going to be looking at. We're basically every other week, starting from now. And I think it was listed originally as 7 total classes, maybe 8. But I'm happy to add as necessary. Like I said before, I have this big tendency to go on tangents, and then we wind up not getting through material, and then I just say, well, let's just meet in 2 weeks, and most people are pretty excited to keep meeting. So we'll just play it a little bit by ear, but our schedule is going to be, today we're going to talk about a church, we're going to do a little church tour, and then talk about the architecture of the church. And then get into church history, and then the following class, Saints, Fathers, and the Theotokos, the Holy Trinity, the person of Jesus Christ, salvation in the Orthodox Church, and then Orthodox spirituality. And again, with these topics, I want to emphasize that we can go in any direction that you all want. We're not fixed. This isn't, the International Orthodox Curriculum Guide that I'm following here. More so, it's topics that have been very helpful to others that have come into the church. But if something's not as helpful or another direction that we'd like to take, I'm happy to entertain all those ideas as well. With the class itself, it's going to be very helpful to be here as often as possible. And I am doing recordings of these classes, so if you happen to miss a class, hopefully we'll be posting those and you can listen to them at a later time. But as all things in the church and what your experience might have been in COVID, being in person is way better than listening to something online, right? So if you can, be in person and participate as much as possible, that's going to be really important for each of us. And I plan on developing a little bit of, let's say, some read resources for you as well. And then I'll send out some texts and things that I think would be beneficial for you. Not a required reading, no pop quizzes, no cold calling, anything like that that's in my usual bag of tricks that I use on students. But it's, of course, going to be really helpful to not only, participate in the class, but build up your knowledge as well when you're outside of here as well. Nothing super dedicated or time consuming. So, and then if you can't, you'll at least have the resources to read at some time in the future as well. Great. And then I encourage you, I should have said this. I thought it this morning when I was driving up, and I thought, I should remind everybody to bring something to take notes with. But I forgot to remind. So if you've got something great, phones to take notes with, I'm just a terrible phone note taker. But I encourage you to do that as well. If anything, just to think of questions to ask at a later time, or just send me emails at a later time. I know when I hear something and I'm like, that was really good, I'm going to remember that. And then 10 minutes later, I'm like, what was that? So it becomes really helpful. Okay, and then lastly, the point of this class, as we've already said, is really of personal transformation, to understand the Orthodox Church, and again, not part of our knowledge, but how do our hearts transformed? And being in the Orthodox Church, how do we consider this life of the church and enter into this life of the church? Because really, when we consider the church, it's not just knowledge, right? You can't just read a book and become Orthodox. And this happens all the time, actually. People will come to Father Evan and they'll say, I've been investigating Orthodox churches, I've been reading, I've been looking to podcasts, and tomorrow I'm ready to become Orthodox. And he's like, just hold on a second. It takes time to enter into the life of the church. It would be like, you read something about somebody's life, and then you go up to him and say, let's get married tomorrow. I know everything there is about you. And the other person is like, maybe we should go on a date first. So much of the Orthodox Church is this relational aspect, that you enter into the life of the church in this way. And so, of course, with this, comes a closer relationship with Jesus Christ. And that's really our goal of being in the church. And that goal really manifests itself primarily in the liturgy and our encounter with Christ in the church and primarily in the Eucharist. And then ultimately here, my goal is to be also informational, not conversional. So if you're just investigating the Orthodox Church, I'm happy just to provide information, not with aspirations to convert. And so just realize that that's my standpoint. Of course, we welcome and invite everybody to become a part of the Orthodox Church, but it's not something that I or anyone here is expecting from pushing you to join the church also. So just also think about it in that way. And then furthermore, there's a lot of things that we have to talk about in the church that are going to be different and unique from other churches. My goal here is not to provide controversy or to, pick out other churches and see, this is how they're bad and this is how we're good. but by the very nature of, representing how we do things versus how other churches do things, can often sound controversial. My goal is not to be controversial in any way, more so just to prevent the truth as we believe it in the Orthodox Church. Okay? So again, not to say so in any controversial standpoint. And so for that, the way we're going to start is we're going to just kind of do a little bit of an introduction of the architecture of the Orthodox Church. Everything that we do in the church is very much ritualistic and is based off of a process. Everything that you see in the church didn't just fall here. It just wasn't invented in the past 100 years, but it's taken really, 2,000 years to develop. And one of the best ways that we can speak about that is the architecture of the Orthodox Church. I'm going to give you kind of a brief overview for that, and then we're just going to do a walk around. We'll start in the back and talk about how we come into the church, what the purpose of the different parts of the church is, and how the physical movement in the church mimics our spiritual lives as well. There's nothing accidental that happens here, and everything that you see really does have purpose. So we can think of the church as having two purposes. Let's say the first is, of course, to provide a space for worship, to provide an opportunity for correct liturgical action, and to live out the services of the church, and even like them being here earlier for the Akathist that they were reading, providing that space and where these different services of the church occur. This might be what we would think of as an exterior view, like a very practical point of view. The church is, built in a certain way to have acoustics in order to provide teaching in a certain way. And so this is, kind of the outside view looking in. Of course, we also have to realize that the church itself mimics the individual. And the church is the body of Christ. And we move forward in the body of Christ. So the church mimics this spiritual life. And we go from the world and we process into the church. And then we meet Christ here on the Solea, in the liturgy with the receiving of the Eucharist. So there's this very strong spiritual aspect of it as well. And we'll find that the church is extremely practical, and it is able to marry these two ideas. So the practical aspect of things with the spiritual aspect as well. Okay? So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and start in the back. And if you just want to walk with me, we'll move around. And again, please ask questions. Any thoughts you have along the way, you won't be interrupting. It's going to just make it a lot more easier to... There we go. Hi, sorry, we're stepping back. Hi, Joe. Okay. Perfect. All right. Wow, there's so many. This is so exciting. Okay, so in the back of the church, one thing and we're very lucky. We purchased this church. And it was a previous, I'm not remembering right now. I forget what it was before we bought it. But all Orthodox churches are oriented from west to east. And when we purchased this church, we didn't construct it in this exact way. But as you can see, that's the west and that's the east. And we know the way that we look at this, architecturally speaking, and then spiritually speaking, is of course what happens in the east. The sun rises from the east and it sets in the west. So we can think of this practically as, the darkness in a way is in the west, and then the light comes from the east. And Christ himself says after the ascension that he will come like the rising of the sun. Okay, so when he ascends into heaven, he says, I will come like the rising of the sun. So we orient ourselves with the expectation that Christ will be coming with the rising of the sun. So that's one of the really important aspects of the orientation of the church facing from west to east. Elijah?
That kind of answer. I was just going to say, it's like you're turning your back kind of to the darkness.
Correct. Yes. So as we're coming into the church, again, that practical aspect of we're turning ourselves away from the darkness and we're facing toward the light. And many churches, the way that the liturgy would be served and would be such that at the highlight, the apex of the liturgy, when communion would come out, they would actually plan the services so that light would stream, the first rays of the morning light would stream right when the Eucharist was coming out. So they would adjust the start time of the services so that it would line up exactly with the rising of the sun. And so it's really this beautiful experience. It's a little bit less practical now. We'd have to wake up really early in order for that to occur. But in some monastic communities, they still go through this process. And you go through the services, and there's lights, there's windows on the back, just like we can see. And the sun would start coming in right at the very end of the liturgy, which is when the Eucharist comes out. So there's this, again, uniting between, the spiritual reality and then lining that up, let's say, with this reality of the rising of the sun. And we take some things very literally. Christ says he will come like the rising of the sun. So we're like, there's the rising sun, here comes Christ. So we wind up really aligning those things up. So when you walk into the church, it depends on the church you're going to go to. I'm going to kind of speak in broad realities rather than just St. Spiridon itself. We're still a little bit of a work in progress. These walls are just white right now, but it's the goal to have iconography on all these walls as well, and all of the blank walls that you can still see in the main church itself. Which is not much. We're really starting to fill all of our walls with iconography, which is really beautiful. So the outside of the church is this room. If you were here, this would be called the exonarthex. And the exonarthex was just this region between being outside and inside. Oftentimes what you would see in this part of the church would be depictions of the Last Judgment. Now, these are actually really interesting. Up until the 16th century, they were not very common in the Orthodox Church. They actually came from the Venetians. So the Venetians wound up bringing this style of iconography into the East, and then it worked its way into Orthodox churches. So in the life of the Orthodox Church, we say that this is a new innovation, right? The 16th century. I always love saying that kind of stuff. Father Evan mentioned that I lived at a monastery for a while, and they had the new church and the old church. The old church was from the 900s. The new church was from the 17th century. And so they're like, oh yeah, we'll see you in the new church. I'm like, which one's that? And it's like, oh, that's the 400-year-old one. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm just checking on that. So there's a different scale of time when we're talking about the church. So as we move in, and one part about the Last Judgment that we would consider is that on your way out of the church, this would be the last thing that you would see. And it's really meant for you to consider then, the gravity of being in the world, and to, consider your actions in the world. And, we encounter Christ here in the church, but ultimately we have to go out into the world, and we can't just live in this beautiful place all the time. I mean, beautiful Colorado. But we have to take the life that we live in the church out into the world. And so part of the depiction of the Last Judgment is to remind us of that. That it's not just, switches on when we're in church and then we step out of the church and be like, okay, church life is over. But instead we're supposed to remember that all the time. Elijah? It's actually very oftentimes it would be all of the walls that are in here. Yeah, it would be all the walls that are in here. Now, there is an icon that we put up in here. This is a very common icon. It's called a theesis. And a theesis is when a saint is offering the church to Christ. So if on your way out, you check that out again, Christ is in the middle, and we have the Mother of God and St. Spiridon, and they are offering this church itself. We had them, paint this exact design of church, and they're offering it to Christ. And this is, again, very common, especially from the Byzantine era. You'll look at a lot of churches, and there'll be a depiction of either the saint of the church, or it was common for the rulers and the emperors, whoever funded the church, to have a depiction of them presenting this church to Christ. I think the most famous one is probably of Justinian, who's offering Hagia Sophia, the famous church in Constantinople, to Christ and kind of presenting it to him. And that would be often one of the first icons that you see here on the way in as well. So when you enter an Orthodox church, again, there's a lot of movement that's associated with it, right? It's not you just go in and you find your seat, you sit down, and that's it. But instead, the first thing that you would come in is you would grab a candle and light a candle. And what you have to remember is that, again, most of the time, the beginning of church services wouldn't be, again, like, 8 a.m., 9 a.m., but it would be in the middle of the night. So you're coming into church in the middle of the night, and you light a candle, and lighting a candle in the dark is really a great experience when you think about it. Right? The room is dark, and you light a candle, and what does that small candle start to do? It pushes the darkness out, right? It pushes the darkness out. And this really reminds us of, creation, of Christ separating the light from the dark. And the church becomes this place of light. And it's really wonderful when you come in, you kiss your candle, you say a little prayer, and you put it in the sandbox, and as more people come, what happens to the light? It spreads, it grows, it increases, and it continues to push out the darkness. Our goal in the church is never to, on our own, try to push out the darkness, but rather to invite in the light. And when you invite in the light, the very nature of light pushes out darkness. And of course, we know who is the light? Jesus Christ. So through the invitation of Christ into our lives, this pushes out the darkness. So when we're in this region here, which is called the narthex, this is kind of this intermediate space between the outside world and then the main body of the church. Now, in this space, it's actually unique in most Western Orthodox churches to have a narthex this big, and it's great. Because this area is really used for a lot of services that are, let's say, somewhat intermediate services. So if you've been to a baptism, or if not, the first service of the baptism actually happens out here. And it's what's called the making of the catechumen. And there's some really important aspects of the service. The primary part of the service is what are called the exorcisms. So there's a series of exorcisms that happen at the very beginning. And before you go into the main body of the church, here in the narthex, we engage in these exorcisms. So we can think, again, the outside world, right? This is outside of the church. And then going into the church, and through the process of coming into the church, we eject the demons, all those things that are, afflicting us. And so that happens in this part of the church. And in fact, during the baptism itself, we walk out and we blow and spit on the devil 3 times. Okay, so we're very literal in our actions here. And those literal actions aren't just words, but everything that we do liturgically, and we'll talk about this certainly later on when we talk about the sacraments and mysteries. Everything that we do liturgically through action isn't just, going through motions, but is a reflection of a spiritual reality as well. So talking about doing exorcisms during the baptism, it's a true thing that's happening. And during this process also, we invite Christ to, come and dwell within the human person. And these aren't just words, but it is a reality that we participate in. So we'll see that the mysteries, the way that we view them in the church is, again, this aspect of the liturgical life that we enact, but then also the true spiritual ramifications of it as well. Okay? And then the other service that very much happens here is during the wedding service. So the wedding service, there's broken into 2 parts. The first wedding service is what's called, it's basically like an engagement service. It's called the betrothal. So if you know from the New Testament, Mary is betrothed to Joseph. But the betrothal is a different service from the marriage, which we call the crowning in the Orthodox Church. So when you're betrothed to somebody, you are not married to this person. And that initial service of the betrothal happens here. Okay? Because it's not the fullness of what we're looking for in the marriage ceremony. So it begins here in the back of the church. And then after the betrothal happens, then you proceed into the church. Now, in the modern day, that hasn't so much manifested itself. A lot of times we just do the betrothal in the front of the church. But that history remains, and it's just an important thing to remember. And then there are some other services that occur here in the back of the church. And the last part that I'll say about this space is that it's also the original place where catechumens would have spent their time in church. Yeah. Not necessarily. It's really just a beautiful mural that we had installed. A lot of times they would have these put in the center of the back of the church. During these services, the clergy would stand in the center and they would say their petitions or the different parts of the service from the center. So I wouldn't say like a specific theological attachment to it, more just this is the place where things happen from. And then the same thing would often be the case up front. We don't have a medallion up front, but very often there would be another medallion up front where like the deacons or the clergy would say the petitions from. And so when we're back here, whenever we say the prayers, this is where we start them from. So the last thing I would say about this part of the church, second to last, is the catechumens would originally be in the back of the church in the narthex before they became Orthodox. And again, the idea of this isn't an idea of a punishment or removing you from the life of the church, but a recognition rather that we do progress. Right? You do move from one stage to another. And it's just a recognition of that. And again, it's sometimes a difficult thing, especially I think in the West for us to think of. Like we have a little bit of a mentality of I deserve, right, to receive all of these things right from the beginning. And the church is like, we are all worthy to receive these things, but we move in this progression. Okay, so I just want to emphasize that there's no punishment that's attached to this, but rather this idea of movement. And then you stay in one place for a time, and then you move to the next place, and you move to the next place. Both physically in terms of the space where we are, but then again mirrored also with our spiritual progression in life as well. Lastly, the thing I would say in here is that the walls in this region, the narthex, would be covered with Old Testament, usually iconography. Again, this is the old revelation of Christ, and then as we move into the church, it would go to New Testament depictions of iconography. Again, this idea of movement and more and greater revelation as we move into the church. Okay. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Wait, so when you say the catechumens would be here, like they would like hear the entire service?
The whole service, yeah. Not the whole service, actually only up through the gospel. They would be in the church up through the gospel, and then they would come back here. So there's this one part of the service where the deacon says, the doors, and wisdom, let us be attentive. That literally means close the doors.
Gotcha.
And from that point on, catechumens would depart and be in the back of the church, and they would close the doors to the church. And only the faithful would remain at that point. And then when they were, welcomed into the church through baptism or chrismation, then they would, participate in the life of the church. So again, these are not necessarily practices that occur now. In most places, there are some still places where they will ask catechumens to leave, but it's just important again to realize this progression that we experience. Asher? It depends on the monastery. Some monasteries do.
I remember I used to say a blessing when I was cateching that should be in the services.
Yes. So it depends. Some of the monasteries will, some of them won't. The monastery that I was at on Mount Athos did not ask people to leave, but some of them would. So it was really just up to, let's say, the abbot or whatever the style of the monastery was. Did you, Chelsea?
Yeah, I have a practical question.
Yeah.
When is it appropriate for a red candle? When do you use those?
So these candles are just candles they're 5-day candles, and they're put up in front of the icons in the front. So anytime you want. One thing that I would say is that there's very little like, when can I do this in the church? Like, when should I do my cross? When should I light a candle? When should I go venerate the icons? There's almost never a time where you should not. Like, all things are really permissible. And it's really intimidating, though, when you come into a church that has so much liturgical action going on, and there's a lot of, I don't want to get in trouble, or I don't want to do something wrong. You really can't do anything wrong. I will say, in terms of the service itself, the only times where you don't want to be really busy are like when the clergy are out doing something. So if there's like an entrance or we're going around the church and things like that, that's the only time where you don't want to be like, walking around the church. Other than that, and it's funny because I think part of that comes from Americans are rule followers in a lot of ways. Like, we don't like to break rules. We kind of stand in line. And my experience has really been formed very much so by being in Greece for a while. And in Greece, there's no such thing as a line. I mean, like, it's the communion mass that goes up. If Father Evan said, okay, everybody get into 4 lines, and then you're going to go to the 4 chalices, if you took a picture from above, it would just be a mass of people, and how they all receive communion, no one knows. But the aspect also of that is that people will always be going up and venerating the icons throughout the entire service. And there's much more of a flow that occurs in those services. It's much more organic. My son was baptized just a few weeks ago, and I told Father Evan, I was like, tell everybody to get out of the chairs and come up. Because it always seemed so distant to me when we were around the font and everybody else was like in the 3rd row or back watching from afar. This is not, the audience watching theater occur. The liturgical life of the church is participatory. I mean, we all share in the liturgy together. And, hopefully you experience that through, singing in the services, and through your prayers, through doing your cross, participating really in the life of the church. And then when we do these other, sacraments of the church that again are like the baptisms or weddings. I went to a wedding in Greece and it was fantastic. There's this one part of the service where the bride and groom, they walk around the table and they call it the dance of Isaiah. And in this church in Greece, the people were like surrounding them, that during the dance, people literally had to like push away and squeeze, and then they get pushed back in as soon as the couple started going around. There wasn't like, oh, we're over here watching it. Like, everybody was there essentially offering their blessing for this wedding to occur. And I was like, this is what it's supposed to be. I mean, this is the life of the church, not just watching, but participating in. And we each participate in our own different ways, right? I mean, the clergy does the clergy stuff, the chanters do the chanting, the people pray and participate in the music of the services, and they offer their assent. Essentially, nothing in the church can happen without the assent of the people. If the clergy are doing their thing and the people do not agree, it can't happen. If people don't come to church, the clergy can't do the services. It's actually not permitted. A priest cannot do a service by himself. It's not permitted in the church. There have to be people here. And that represents the fullness of the church. Matthew?
For any of us that don't know, can you define catechumen?
Oh, catechumen is just someone who's learning. It comes from Greek word catechesis, if you know catechesis, so someone which is just to learn, really. So someone who's a learner and who's in the life of the church, participating and actively, actively pursuing the life of the church. would be what a catechumen is. So, yeah. All right. See, I've spent so much time in just the narthex, and now we haven't even gotten to the nave. So let's just move our way back in, and we'll come up to the front. Just anywhere. You can of course sit if you'd like. All right, so the main body of the church is what's called the nave, and there's a lot of distinct architectural elements that are a part of the nave. Primarily, there are two styles that most Orthodox churches will have. One's what is called a basilica style. This is a basilica style, so like long, narrower church layout. This is actually the oldest style. If you visit the old churches, the very old churches in Rome, these are the basilica styles. Most Roman churches continued to follow this style. So you go to like St. Peter's in Rome, and very, very long basilica style. And these were predominant through like the 4th and 5th centuries. If you go to most of the old churches in Greece that are from that time period, like St. Demetrius and Thessaloniki from the 4th century, I think. And then if you visit some of the churches in the Holy Land, they're going to have this basilica style where they're very, elongated. And the other style was what's more of the domed church. And the dome church model really became the greatest model in the 6th century when Justinian builds Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. And in the 6th century, then, this became really the architectural model par excellence for Orthodox churches. So from that point on, for the most part, Orthodox churches take on the style of Hagia Sophia. And if you don't know, Hagia Sophia is like a really big dome. And this is important architecturally speaking, in that instead of there being a distance, right, and let's say a separation from people in the back to people in the front, when you're in these just big domed churches, there might be another name for it, for big domed churches. Does anybody know? I'm relying on my history teacher over here, but no. So in this other architectural style, when you look at it, people aren't at a distance away, but almost everybody seems to be equidistant from the altar, right? Just think of a big circle, and the altar is just on one side of the circle. So instead of there being this distance, everything is kind of folded and pointed in towards the altar. And then it really is, highlighted by the large dome that's on top. And we're going to talk about that, of course, as an architectural feature as well. So within this space, we'll talk about each one of these details individually. Of course, the iconography that happens on the side walls, this is going to vary from church to church. We'll talk about it from a top-down level in a second. And then, of course, in the back of the church, we have two icons. Now, the way that we've chosen to do it is because we don't have a dome in this church. We've taken the primary icon that's usually up in the dome, and we've put it in the rear of the apse. So this icon in the back of the Church of Christ is called Christ Pantocrator, which just means the ruler of all. And again, this would be, in a dome over the center of the church. Now, what's really interesting about this icon is, what do you notice about Christ? There's probably a lot of things that you could notice. He's bending out. This is really important in terms of the style. If you'd see this as a dome and you see Christ bending down like you from the dome, what does it look like? He's embracing all of the people. And then the other aspect of this, embracing the people, is also that God condescends to become a human. So God condescends to become a human. He doesn't just stay distant in the heavens, but he essentially removes his divinity and fully takes on his humanity in order to unite himself to his people. So the architectural element of the dome is really meant to emphasize that. And then with his arms outspread, you see the embracing of Christ for his people. Furthermore, in the icon, you can see that it's only half of Christ that's depicted, right? Just from his midsection up. And this is meant to represent for us that while Christ is the head of the church, we are the body of the church. Okay, so as it bends down, we see Christ as the head, but we represent the body. That's why there's only half of him depicted there. Yeah.
Who decided how these people look? For example, if you go to the Ethiopian church, is a black icon of Christ? Is he a black man?
I don't know that.
Chinese icons usually depict most of the saints as Chinese.
That is often the case. I couldn't speak to certain ones, but I will point out a few examples for you. So, for example, St. Paul. If you ever see an icon of St. Paul, he always looks the same. He's bald, and he has this little tuft of hair on the front of his head, and usually a pointed beard. And if you see icons of St. Paul from all the way back in the 4th century, he looks exactly like that. So are these, somehow historically connected to the apostles and to these different saints? We don't have an answer to that. But another one is actually Saint John Chrysostom. St. John Chrysostom always has a short beard, and he has a bigger head and bald. You can look at depictions of the saints without their names, and you can almost always tell who they are. Not always, but very, very often you can tell who they are. And of course, there's going to be some historical variations of the saints. Like you said, if you see in an Asian church, they might, have more Asian features. But for the most part, a lot of this iconography has been around for 1,700 years. And stylistically, it's just built on top of that style since then. There's been very little variation, let's say, in iconographic style. It's received a little bit of criticism over the years for being very simplistic. It's all two-dimensional. But this is quite in contrary to the reality that at the time it wasn't that, the church or the culture didn't have this level of sophistication to draw three-dimensional drawings, but the two-dimensional nature of the icons themselves have a theological purpose. And so this is what becomes really important. Fotini?
Don't you think there's quite a bit of difference between the Coptic, the Greek, and the Russian style?
For sure. The Coptic and the Greek style is definitely very unique. One thing I'd say about that is, the Coptics and the Greeks, for the most part, had separated by the 5th century. And so they were... Well, the Russian is a little bit different. So the Russian church used to stylistically be like the Greek church. And when Peter the Great came along, Peter the Great loved Western everything. And so he changed the iconography in the church to match Western iconography, and he changed the music of the church to match Western music. And so with Peter the Great, which is what year? He's my history guy. Late 17th century, we start seeing the Russian church divert in terms of the style of their music and then their iconographic style as well. And architecture. Russian architecture is much more like Baroque. Big, thick, heavy beams and extremely ornate, which is much more of a Baroque style. Yeah.
What the first icons were?
In the church itself, we have a tradition that the first icon was painted by St. Paul of Mary. So that is the tradition of the church says that St. Paul painted the first icon of Mary. The prototype of it, I'm not sure if we have the prototype, but the style of the icon is actually very similar to ours. It's called, this icon is called Odiitria. It's the one who directs. Yeah, so whenever you see Mary gesturing to Christ in this very particular way, with Christ as a child sitting very upright, this icon specifically is called the Directress. And the Directress is the icon that was painted by St. Paul.
Do you know where that one was found? Or where?
I don't.
There's supposed
I don't.
to be in a monastery on Cyprus. My brother lived there and went to see.
Yeah, so we do have the tradition of these icons still existing and being around for very long periods. If you go to there are icons that are present, I think, from the 2nd century, like mural paintings. But in the 3rd century, there are mural print paintings that you can still see. And then some of the oldest, like, let's say, iconographic depictions are things like ichthys. Anybody know the Jesus fish? Yeah, so the Jesus fish is an original Christian depiction, and it comes from the Greek word ichthys, which is an acronym, actually. So the word ichthys means fish, but it's also an acronym that's Jesus Christ, Son of God, Lord. So Iisus Christos Theou Io Kyrios, something like that. But you just take those letters, and that forms an acronym, and that acronym is ichthys, which is fish. So that's where the Jesus fish comes from. Yeah.
Wasn't there, I forget, there was some explanation when you see Saint Spiridon holding the book, how there was something where the further away something is,
Yes.
the smaller it is.
Yeah, so this is part of the iconographic style that I was speaking about before. Again, icons are not meant to be artistically rich in of themselves, but rather they are meant to have a theology behind them. And they're supposed to depict not an earthly reality, which is why they're not three-dimensional. Right? This was very important theology. They're not meant to portray something that's in this world, but rather something that is otherworldly. And that's why, excuse me, they're depicted in the way that they are and why they have this particular style. So what Seth is talking about is that icons usually have a reversed perspective. So a reverse perspective is just this. When you see something, when you see Charlie standing in the back of the room, is he bigger or smaller than me? He's smaller. Why? He's farther away. Because he's farther away, he's smaller. Now, the way we depict things in the church, however, and this is probably the best representation of Christ, if you look at Christ, which part of the book is bigger? The back or the front? The back is book. Now, is this what we would expect if we were to see a book? No, books are pretty small, but the front of the book would look bigger than the back of the book. This is reverse perspective. And the reason is because Christ is the center and we are the vanishing point. So in other words, as you come farther away from Christ, then you lose meaning. Right? Our existence relies on the person of Jesus Christ. So the reality is not this reality of the world, but rather the heavenly reality. And so our goal is to move into this heavenly reality, let's say. So this kind of depiction is fairly common. And you'll see it in a lot of the texts. I mean, almost everyone where someone's carrying a book, you're going to see exactly the same motif over and over again of this reverse perspective. And then there's a whole semester we could do on icons. I mean, they're incredibly rich. Each icon is meant to tell a story. Every element in the icon is not something that's left up to the artist's whims. There is a set iconographic style down to color, the placement of, clothing, of all of these different items that is, again, not up to the whim of the artist, but rather is a part of the tradition of the church. So if you want to become an iconographer, you don't just learn how to draw this way. You have to understand all of the theology. You have to understand why things are depicted in some way, why certain colors are used, why items are placed in certain locations. Because remember, people in the church originally didn't have the ability to read, right? So the primary mode of education would have been through hearing the scripture in church, and then also visually experiencing the life of the church through these icons. Okay? Yes?
We're probably going to do the last one, I believe.
Yes.
Will we do the lights and the doors?
Of course.
Especially the ones that are missing.
Of course. Thank you. Will do. All right. Well, we only got through Christ Pantocrator in the back. All right, so Christ in this depiction, we of course see him as the ruler of all, and his right hand is in this position of blessing. So if you see, Christ almost always has his hand depicted like this. If you look closely, this is very particular. This is how the priest always blesses you. The priest never blesses in his name. He always blesses in the name of Christ. And if you look at this real quick, this is ICXC, which are, of course, the first and last, I know it's hard to see, ICXC, which are the first and last letters, Iisus Christos. So IC at the end, an S in Greek looks like a C when it's at the end of a word.
Say SC or X?
ICXC. ICXC. Right up there, you see the two letters on to the left and right of Christ's halo? ICXC. So these are the first and last letters of Christ's name. So whenever the priest blesses, he always blesses in the name of Christ. And you can see this in many other instances. If there's ever somebody blessing, St. John the Baptist is doing the same here. And this is a great depiction over here. There's rarely an icon that you will see, especially in this Eastern iconography, where Mary is by herself. But this, being an icon of the Annunciation, is before Christ is born. However, the angel Gabriel is going up and blessing Mary. You see his hand? If you look at it from the side, it looks exactly the same. So blessing in the name of Christ. And then, of course, the Holy Spirit descending upon her from that event. So, so we primarily see that in the Pantocrator icon, and then even little Christ here in the arms of Mary is also blessing in exactly the same way. So very, very commonly, depictions of Christ will have him blessing with his hand in this orientation. All right, and then now going back from there, we have an icon that's called Platitera. English is more spacious than the heavens. And this is very traditionally the icon that goes in the rear of the church. And its name is very specific, more spacious than the heavens. The reason why we say this is because we recognize Mary as the mother of God. Now, this is a very technical term, and a lot of times people struggle with this term. Mother of God. And we say that it's a technical term because who was her son? Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ, we believe, is God. So if Mary is the mother of Jesus Christ, who is God, we have to say that she is the mother of God. Now, there was a huge controversy over this. There was a whole ecumenical council that was essentially dealing with this term, which in the Greek is Theotokos. So it becomes really important that we assign this honor to her as the mother of God. Not because of who she is, but rather what her relationship with her son is. Every time we speak about Mary in the church, and we'll talk more about this when we get to this section, we always speak about her in her relationship with her son. And that's why in like this iconic, in this depiction here, she's directing people to her son. Okay, so all representations of Mary essentially all point to Christ. In fact, everything in the church points to Christ. If we ever think, oh, we're worshiping saints, we're worshiping Mary, no. The reason why we look to these different aspects of the church is because they all point to Christ. And that is, of course, the ultimate goal. So if Christ, who is God, is the God of the universe, the creator of everything, and somehow she contained him in her womb, then her womb is more spacious than the heavens. So you see that little play? And it becomes really powerful. We acknowledge that this person of Christ is the creator and the sustainer of the entire universe, but somehow mysteriously he came to dwell within the womb of a young woman. And so that's why we give her the title. And that's why we place this depiction of her in the rear of the church. For us to always ponder this mystery, right? So that when you come into church and you approach the holy altar, that you ponder this mystery of, God becoming incarnate. Yeah.
So in the liturgy, we do ask for the Theotokos' prayers.
Yes.
For us. What is the purpose of that? Because obviously Jesus hears our prayers himself as well.
Yeah.
So what is the purpose of asking for the Theotokos also to pray for us?
Sure. Do you ever ask anybody else to pray for you? Why?
I don't know. That's just what I grew up doing.
But do you think it's appropriate?
Yeah.
Yeah. We really see the life of the church as including everybody else in the church. So when we ask people for their prayers, it's not rejecting Christ. It's not any way saying that he somehow needs the intercessions of these saints, but rather we include everybody else in the church. Just like we ask of our friends and our family, if we're struggling, if we need help with something, please pray for me. And we realize and we believe in the church that God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And so the saints, while they're dead in this life, they're still alive in Christ. And so we still believe that we can be in relationship with them even though they're not here on earth. So we ask for their prayers just like we would ask for the prayers of our friends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before I came here, I went to a couple services at Holy Theophany.
Uh-huh.
And I had one opportunity to pray in Akathist.
Yeah.
Which requested several times for the Most Holy Theotokos to save us.
Correct. Yeah.
That was also something that I was confused about.
Sure.
Because, that's, I think, a step beyond kind of inviting into the life of the church to share in those prayers.
Yes. So we have to be a little bit careful with the term save, because there's salvation save, but there's also I'm drowning in a pool, and what do you yell to the lifeguard? Save me! Are you asking for them to help you with your salvation? No. And that's really how we're speaking to the saints as well. That's how we speak to Mary. When we say, Most Holy Theotokos, save us, it's save me from these struggles. And in that service, it was maybe Paraclesis, Most Holy Theotokos, save us. That service, if you pay attention to all the words in there, they're all I am drowning. I am at the darkest in my life. I'm struggling with all of these things that are afflicting me. Save me. So the crux of that service is really just come help me intercede in my life, not offer me salvation. That is up to God alone. And the church recognizes that. But I think just in our culture, we haven't been able to separate those two ideas out. But it really focuses more on that side of, come and intercede in my life. And we call out to the Mother of God, to the saints, in the same way we call out to a lifeguard. Save me.
Can I continue asking questions about
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if it's taken too
No, it's great.
So why not call to Jesus then to save us? I mean, not even just with salvation, but also just to intercede in our lives.
Sure, and we do have services that are dedicated to asking Christ for his prayers as well. But in James, it says the prayers of a righteous man avail much. So we're instructed to ask each other for, our prayer, for their prayers. And the big part of that is that, we live in community and we invite people to be in the community with us. And that, of course, you can always pray to Christ. But, part of living in a community is engaging in other people and sharing your burdens with other people. And that doesn't diminish the role of Christ in your life. In a way, it enhances it. Because our Christian life, living out in community, it winds up strengthening even more. When we're just alone, when we separate ourselves, when we're isolated, when we say, well, all I need is Jesus, I don't need anything else, what we find is inevitably you're probably going to slip into darkness or despair. Not because Jesus isn't enough, but we were created to live in community. And that's always been the life of the church. I mean, just look at the apostles as they came together to celebrate and share in the Eucharist together and in prayer in the temple together. They didn't just go their own way and say, all I need is Jesus. So I think that's the big part of it, and that we should always be praying for each other and always be asking each other for prayers in our times of need. And then, of course, asking Christ. But it's not like when you ask somebody to pray for you that somehow has, taken away from you asking for God to pray for you as well. Right? We've just included more people in those prayers. Eric?
I just like coming from a Protestant background, I also kind of struggle with this a little bit.
Yeah.
Thinking about the wedding in Cana where
Yeah.
I mean, like, just imagine you're the host of that wedding, and you're going to marry, and you're like, hey, well, I don't know what to do here, right?
Yeah.
Like, she knows to ask Jesus for help, she
Right,
knows
right.
how to approach her son.
Right, yes.
I think about, like, my own relationship with my mom, right? And she came to me and asked me for something, and I was like, well, I don't really like that guy. But I would do it anyway, she asked me.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great example, and we see this oftentimes. I mean, Mary is able to convince her son. This wasn't his original plan to work a miracle, but because she asked, he's like, because you asked, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And we see this also in the Old Testament. What city is it that God wants to destroy, and then Abraham convinces him otherwise? Is it Sodom? One of the two. So God is going to go destroy the city, and Abraham's like, whoa, hold on a second. What if there are only like 10 righteous people that live in this city? And he says, if there are 10 righteous people, I won't destroy the city. And then he said, okay, what if there's only 5 righteous people that are living in this city? And he goes, okay, fine. If there's only 5 people, then I won't destroy the city. And then he goes, okay, what if there's only 1 righteous person that's living in the city? He says, if there is only 1, then I won't destroy the city. So we see this type of intercession by the saints, that they go in and, changes the mind of God. Okay, God's immutable, he's all the things, but somehow we are in relationship with him. And relationship is like a give and take situation. And we see this time and again, that the saints come in and they convince God, right? Here's what I was going to originally do, but okay, you convinced me of something else. Now, again, God is all-knowing. He's omnipotent, omniscient. He knows every possible trajectory, but he condescends to come down and be in relationship with us. So that we offer these prayers, and through our prayers and intercessions, he's willing to take a different trajectory. And how that works out, we don't know. It's a mystery. But it's a beautiful mystery that God has allowed us to participate in. Right? So it becomes really powerful. And not just, us as individuals, but his entire community and all of the saints. And he invites us into this opportunity to pray for each other, to ask for each other's prayers, and that the saints, again, are not just, people who have died and they're lying in the grave somewhere, but they are alive in the church. And so when we pray, when we see the saints, all these depictions of here, they're not just drawings. They instead represent a true reality of men and women who are still alive in Christ. And that's really the important part, I think, of the life of the church and the life of the saints to remember. Asher?
I was just going to ask, because I try to understand this, especially if someone would it be a good explanation sort of to say, like, because God is he's all powerful. So efficiency is not a concern for him. But because we're his creation and he loves us, he uses us to participate in the salvation of others and just life in general through prayer. He doesn't need to.
Right.
He can do what he wants.
Right.
Because he loves us and he loves the saints, he likes to use his creation because it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Is that a good explanation?
That's great.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Are we good? Are we good on time? I know I have us in an hour right now.
I remember Brother Evans saying that God doesn't need anything, but why use other people to intercede and whatever, because just God likes it. He doesn't need it. But
Yeah, he doesn't need anything. Why create if he doesn't need anything?
for us, it's not that
Right.
God needs it.
Right. Right. Creation is an outpouring of love. That's ultimately what creation is. God didn't need to create. He didn't need to create the universe or people, but we believe that he did so out of an outpouring of love for, I can't say outpouring of love for his people, but rather just an outpouring of love. Creation is just an outpouring of love. And we are the manifestation of that, let's say.
That book by Father Callisto Ware talks about that as well.
Yeah.
He gives a really good explanation as to why he would create it all.
Yes, yeah. And that's a good reference. I'll make a note to send that out. So, gosh, there's so many more things to talk about, but I don't want to take advantage of your time. Do you have maybe like 15 more minutes-ish? If you don't, this is recorded. You can come back and listen to it later. So let me just take 10, 15 more minutes and see if we can finish up just this little bit of a church tour here. Okay, so those are the two main icons that you'll see in any church, the Pantocrator and the Platitera. And again, theological realities that we rely on. Now, again, the Pantocrator would be in the top of the dome. And as you work your way down from a dome, again, in an archetypal church where there is an iconography going all the way down, what you would see is at the very top, you would see the angels that we already have around Pantocrator. And oftentimes there would be the heavenly feast. A good place to see this is if you ever get the opportunity to go to the cathedral in Denver. The cathedral in Denver is a dome. There's no building. It's just a dome. It's a really, really big dome that's just sitting on the ground. But they've got all of the iconography in the dome on the inside of it. It's really, really beautiful. And as you work your way down, we would then have the apostles. We would have the prophets of the Old Testament. And then in 4 medallions at the base of the dome would be the 4 apostles, the 4 gospel writers. And then from there, we'd start seeing things like the feasts. So the big feasts of the church, we always have the crucifixion on the left side and then the resurrection on the right side, opposite of each other. There is no crucifixion without the resurrection, so they always have equal importance, let's say, within the life of the church. And these are just icons that we have specifically depicted to have in our church. The transfiguration of Christ, of course, and then the nativity, annunciation, and the baptism of Christ. Different churches will have different icons that are in here. Usually these will be elevated a little bit more than where they are, but just for space limitations, this is where they are located.
Stuff going on the ceilings.
Our goal is to put stuff on the ceilings. I don't know what they will be yet. Probably saints.
Over here in this small blue patch, there's like stars.
Yeah, they're going to just paint it and then put something on until I think we put iconography up at some point. So I don't know what it's going to be, but our goal is to do that and, of course, do the whole back of the church.
Figure out what you're going to put next, just out of your brain or out of...
No, it would follow some kind of iconographic style. Like everything that we've done here has been in consultation with the bishop and the iconographer, not just we call them and say, hey, what can we do? But having any of the feasts is very traditional in these positions. So if we'd picked any feasts, it would have been great. And then lastly, there's usually one or two more rows that you would see. And the last two rows would be mostly the depictions of individual saints, kind of like what we have here on these medallions here. These were all that were special to our community. Different groups within the community pooled their resources and donated these individual icons. So that's how these were chosen. And then as you step down, the last icons that you would see in the church would always be the military saints of the church. So these are like St. George, St. Theodore, there's two St. Theodore, St. Demetrius, and these are the military saints, so commanders and generals.
This church was expanded or rebuilt. What would you do with?
Oh, I don't think we're changing this building at all. I hope not.
That ever happened? I mean,
The way Daryl was telling me is it's already kind of sketchy because this was the expansion that they did. So
Yeah.
The architecture already isn't quite there, so we can't really do
Right. This roof we looked at trying to do some stuff with, and this roof cannot be changed. So this layout right here is the layout that we can do. We just have to build another church.
well, that's what I'm asking. What if you did? What would you do with this?
Oh, no, we would keep this church just as it is, and then we would build another one for more people. So, God willing, we'll keep growing in northern Colorado here. And so this last level then is the depiction of the military saints. And the church looks at, let's say, the church in two ways: the church triumphant and the church militant. The church triumphant is all of those who, like St. Paul, have finished the race, right? They are in the heavenly kingdom. They are in the bosom of Abraham. They're surrounded by the angels. We call this a church triumphant. And then here in the world is the church militant. So this last layer, being the military saints, reminds us then that we are part of the church militant. So if you were again in a fully iconographed church, you would look down, you would see the military saints, and then you would look down one level, and what would you see? All of the people in the church. So they are the representation of the militant church, or rather their representation of our goal. Okay? And so we here are the current church. We are the images, the icons of the church in this world. And so becomes, let's say, this logical progression as we go down. Yeah?
What does it mean that they're militant, and also what distinguishes between the triumphant saints versus the militant saints?
When I say the militant church, that's us. We are the militant church. It means that we are still fighting for our salvation, that we are actively engaged in the spiritual life. And, we struggle in the world and we fight in the world, not like, with axes and I don't know why I just went medieval, but, we're not fighting in that way. But Christ says that the kingdom of heaven is taken by force. Right? It's not something that you just, I'm just going to be good and it's all going to be. But you have to desire, right? There's an aspect of the church that requires desire and almost like a forceful, knocking and, let me in. I love the story of the widow that's knocking on the door. And I forget who's in the inside? The man on the inside who doesn't want to answer the door? What? The judge, right. Yes, the widow's knocking on the judge's door. And he doesn't want to open the door, but she's just persistent, keeps knocking on the door over and over and over again. And because of her persistence, he opens the door. So, being in the church isn't just a passive thing. It's active. We have to be actively engaged in the spiritual life. We have to be actively engaged in our acts of prayer, our acts of fasting, our acts of goodwill to others. It's not just something that we can sit around in our house and say, well, if I don't do anything bad, then I'll be okay. You have to actively pursue the spiritual life. And that's what it means by the church militant.
Does that mean we're fighting Satan?
I mean, in a way, yes. right? In a way, yes. In our spiritual life, we do. And he's fighting us, but, Satan has no teeth. He's got no strength. He's got a voice, and that's it, right? But we can think about, fighting, the passions and these things that, assault us every day. But at the end of the day, we realize that Satan is powerless next to Christ. And in the church, then, it's not so much that we fight Satan, but like the candle that we started with, that we invite Christ, we invite the light into our life. And it's not us who pushes out the evil one. It's Christ who does it. So we are in this, military in the church, but as long as we invite Christ in a way, he is the one that does this work, right? He is the one that's fighting the devil. St. Porphyrios is a recent saint of the church, and he's very famous for saying this, that everybody spends so much time fighting darkness. The only thing we really have to do is invite in the light. So, yeah.
What makes some saints triumphant and other saints militant?
No. When I say the triumphant, everyone who's died is the triumphant church. We are the militant church. Yeah.
I thought you were saying like Saint George.
No, there are some saints who were in the military. Like St. George was in the military, St. Demetrius was in the military, St. Theodore. These were actual military saints. And so it's just making this connection between, they were military saints, but then we are the actual church militant. Yeah. It's like they were in the army or whatever, in their lives. Yeah. Sorry, that was a little confusing. Yeah.
Do you know specifically why the icon of John has wings depicted with wings?
Yeah, so John is a messenger. So the Greek word for angel, angelos, means messenger. So as the herald and the forerunner of Christ, he brings this message of repentance and salvation to the people. And so that's essentially why he's depicted with angel wings. And then the other aspect of John the Baptist that we always see is, who does he look like? He looks like Christ. So as we enter into the church, as we become Christians, the word Christian means one who belongs to Christ. Right? So we come to belong to Christ, and in that process, we start to look like him. Not in physicality again, but in our actions and the way that other people perceive us. You can meet somebody and be like, that is a Christ-like person. And so the iconography depicts that, in the drawing itself, meant to point to the fact that he was Christ-like. Yeah. Right, any last questions and we can wrap it up for today? I know, information dump, I'm sorry. But it's a real pleasure. I of course, love talking about this. And thank you for questions. And like I said, I don't like to stand up in front, so just keep asking questions, and it makes me super happy. But I think in 2 weeks, we'll be back. And I forget already. We're gonna go into church history a little bit, and again, we'll just move at whatever pace is appropriate for all of us. And I really look forward to all the time together. And again, I think I've got this recorded, unless it turned off. So I'll make sure to get that posted too. All right.
You said you're going to send out a list.
I will. I'll send out some resources over this week, and then I'll also just give a reminder a few days before next time that we'll be having class. And the schedule did change from the original one, so make sure if I didn't get your email address that I get your email address so you can get only one of the classes has changed. I'm going to be traveling one of the days, and so I couldn't wind up teaching on that day. I don't know. I didn't see it. I was down at St. Peter and Paul with the bishop today. So I zoomed up to get here, which is why I was a little bit late. So, okay. Thank you.